The safety of people matters, and in our vulnerable Caribbean region, effective, inclusive, people-centered, multi-hazard early warning systems are not an option, they are a requirement. Good morning. My name is Elizabeth Riley. I am the Executive Director of the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, and it is my pleasure to guide us through today's regional launch of the Early Warning for All initiative for the Caribbean. Let me start by welcoming distinguished audience that is attending this event in person here at the United Nations House in Barbados, or following the live broadcast via UWI-TV and UNDRR channels. I also wish to take the opportunity to express solidarity with the government and people of Turkey and Syria in the aftermath of the recent earthquake. Today's event is divided into two segments. During the first segment, we will have interventions from the Honorable Prime Ministers of Barbados and St. Lucia, as well as recorded messages from the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations and the Secretary General of the Caribbean Community. The second segment will be a panel discussion moderated by the United Nations Resident Coordinator for Barbados and the OECS countries. As you might be aware, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called for every person on Earth to be protected by early warning systems within 5 years, in line with Target G of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030, and with the priority to support the most vulnerable. In order to make this ambition a reality, during the COP27 Climate Change Conference in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, last November, the Executive Action Plan for the Early Warnings for All initiative was unveiled. This regional launch is a unique opportunity to harness the highest political as well as technical support to achieve the ambition as set by the UN Secretary General. In order to shape these ambitions to the context of small island developing states and the Caribbean region, we have the privilege to count among us today the Honorable Mia Amor-Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados. Joining us online, the Honorable Philip J. Pierre, Prime Minister of St. Lucia. And video recorded messages from the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Ms. Amina J. Mohammed, and the Secretary General of the Caribbean Community, Dr. Carla Barnett. Before giving the floor to our distinguished speakers, I invite you to view a video which summarizes the Early Warnings for All initiative. I now invite you to listen to a recorded message by Ms. Amina J. Mohammed, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations.
Prime Minister Motley, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, while I wish I could be with you in person, I'm delighted to send this message for the first launch of the Early Warnings for All initiative. I thank Barbados, CARICOM, and the Caribbean Disaster Management Agency for hosting and organizing this event. I especially want to thank the Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honourable Mia Motley, and the Prime Minister of St. Lucia, the Honourable Philip Pierre, for their leadership and support. Today we carry a clear message. Every person in the Caribbean, in small island developing states, and the world must be protected by an effective, multi-hazard early warning system. This is not a privilege, but a right that every person on Earth should enjoy. That is why the Secretary General has launched the Early Warnings for All initiative, with a goal to reach universal early warning systems coverage by 2027. Early warning systems save lives, they protect livelihoods, and deliver huge economic and social benefits. Just 24 hours notice of an impending hazardous event can cut damage by 30%. Yet, vulnerable communities around the world have no way of knowing that hazardous weather is on its way, nor do they have the means to act to save lives and livelihoods. Every third person in the world, primarily in small island developing states and least developed countries, is not covered by multi-hazard early warning systems. 60% of the African population is not covered. Even less have local disaster preparedness plans. Countries with limited early warning coverage have disaster mortality rates that are 8 times higher than countries with high coverage. Families and communities have a right to be warned of incoming hazards and to protect lives, livelihoods, and other assets. This is especially true for the Caribbean, which suffers from the larger disasters relative to its size. Due to the effects of climate change, we know that climate and other disasters are set to increase, exposing small island developing states to greater vulnerabilities. To provide early warning systems for all within the next 5 years, the United Nations system, governments and partners must work together to address gaps across the 4 key pillars of early warning systems: understanding disaster risk, monitoring and forecasting, communication, and preparedness and response capacity. This will require an initial investment of just $3.1 billion, but will save countless lives and economies. I urge all governments, financial institutions, and civil society to support this effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary General, for highlighting the commitment of the United Nations to ensure that every single person in the world must be protected by an effective multi-hazard early warning system as a right that everyone should enjoy. And now we move from the global to the regional, and I invite you to view the recorded message by Dr. Carla Barnett, the Secretary General of the Caribbean Community.
Honorable Mia Moore-Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados, Honorable Philip Pierre, Prime Minister of St. Lucia, Your Excellency Amina Mohammed, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Ms. Elizabeth Riley, Executive Director, Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, other special invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to greet you at the launch of the Caribbean program of the Early Warning for All initiative. This bold initiative, which will support resilience building in our region, carries the endorsement of the Caribbean Community Secretariat. The United Nations Secretary General has called for an action plan for every person on the earth to be protected by early warning systems by 2027. Given the trajectory of the climate crisis, I salute his leadership and ambition in this regard. We have no choice but to pour our collective efforts into improving early warnings for all of the various natural disasters that befall our region. This is a key adaptive response to the inability so far to limit global emissions to a level that would keep global temperature rise to within 1.5 degrees of pre-industrial levels. The region has been bearing the brunt of the impact of global warming, and therefore It is no surprise that our heads of government have provided leadership for initiating the implementation of this plan in the Caribbean. We are all acutely aware of the developmental setback that a few hours of severe weather inflicts on small states. This is, of course, in conjunction with slow onset climate impacts like sea level rise and accelerated drought flood cycles. Timely, accurate, and user-friendly early warning requires a wide spectrum of support. We are at a good time to take stock given the recent midterm reviews of Sendai and Target G, particularly, and the midterm review of the Caribbean's own comprehensive disaster management framework. We can add to this the recent and routine reporting from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the World Meteorological Organization, which all provide valuable input into a regional assessment of progress and gaps. In addition, inclusive and streamlined approaches to implementing early warning products is required at all levels so that local communities, youth, and all other vulnerable groups may contribute valuable input to development of systems that guard their own safety. We also need to take a fresh look at capacity building, moving beyond the providing weather stations and a few days of training to seek out opportunities for education and vocational training to support equipment maintenance, statistics and data management, artificial intelligence and modeling, and broadened communication strategies. But above all, we must continue on a path where early warning is seen by all users as underpinned by principles of authority, credibility, and salience. Med services have constantly battled stubborn disregard for warnings and fake information, which undermine credible efforts and engender public displeasure when a disaster does not occur as it was predicted. This is detrimental to the goal. We learned during our most recent global health crisis that rampant misinformation can be so debilitating that it can become its own crisis. Decades of progress in meteorological services have provided a strong platform for the pursuit of multi-hazard early warning systems in the region. Weather-related products and services, despite the challenges, are mainstreamed in daily and seasonal decision-making and planning. We have to build on that progress. Through the early warning for all, aligning with other existing initiatives, we can reach a space where all major sources of risk information and products can reach the effective level of maturity and public integration. We clearly saw the tremendous benefit of multi-hazard early warning in action in St. Vincent and the Grenadines in the lead up to the eruption of La Soufriere. Despite massive infrastructure damage, early warning and acting upon it saved lives. The machineries of the whole disaster risk reduction system at the national and regional levels can never receive enough praise for this achievement. Lessons and good practice can permeate the region to ensure multi-hazard early warning systems are a critical climate resilient exercise. Let me thank our heads of government, the United Nations family, our regional institutions, and the multitude of partners in academia, local communities, and stakeholders that will influence the planning and implementation of early warning for all. It is my expectation that this launch will stimulate important discussions around the vital importance of early warning for all as we face our challenging future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary General Barnett, for highlighting the importance and the timeliness of this initiative for the Caribbean region, but I think also importantly for linking this discussion to the realities on the ground and the implications for people, and also for highlighting the capacity of the regional institutions. And so we turn to our first cultural piece, and I wish to introduce Mr. Akeem Chandler Prescott, who will be performing a piece entitled Family Affair. Please welcome him.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here. As she said, my name is Akim Chana Prescott. I'm actually the Poetry Slam King of Barbados. And this piece that I'm performing is actually the piece that won. It's called Family Affair. Mother Nature, you should have aborted us in the beginning. Instead, you gave birth to some good-for-nothing children who aren't willing to see the bigger picture. Their focus is too locked in on what's right in front of them, can only see their immediate pleasure and gain. They are blind to the pain of tomorrow. Is that why they wallow in self-pity like pigs in feces? This species will never truly know peace. Not even a priest could save our souls from the corruption of consumption. The devil is in the details, or in this case, the devil is in the air when you inhale. It's in the retail and manufacturing sector. They rectify the need to supply by demanding the clearing of holy land and burning of sacred forests. And in this cathedral of wilderness, that fiery foliage burning was the unholiest thing a man like me could ever witness. And I thought to myself, why would your son rip this page of history from the book of evolution and crumple entire species into extinction, then toss the paper in to the recycling bin? Soon, Google will be a museum of all the things we have defiled, a Smithsonian for nature, and we will browse through the aisles, marveling at the genocide on exhibition. For God's creatures, a bushfire is Armageddon, and there won't be no heaven for Bambi, my dear. Only an ashy grave and a hard-learned lesson that climate change does not discriminate with its progression. It welcomes all into the recession it will cause. This war on plastic can't be won with any of our bombs at best. Our napalm may only be useful in burning the bridges we're too afraid to cross, which is that we have lost the childhood of children who are yet to be born. Mother Nature, I keep trying to warn you. Your son makes everything mirror him. Is that why the coral reefs are bleached out more than the Jamaican skin? Why Caribbean people seem obsessed with bleaching the wrong thing? Our beaches brown with seaweed, while we busy trying to look like a pretty browning. We still browsing history's pages, looking for the chapter where we fit in, but only finding stories of disaster. Mother Nature, what will you do after we are gone? Will you casually move on, recognizing that humankind has never really been kind throughout the duration of humanity? The oceans choke and deep throat on plastic. Their gag reflects the tsunamis. When the Atlantic vomits on our shores, no matter gravel or gravel can cure the coast from that nauseous tragedy. We should be charged with assault and battery on a planetary scale. Go before jury of our great-great-great-great-grandchildren and get denied bail. Scientists been giving us warnings to no avail, because Mother Nature, your children just too blasted hard-ears. They refuse to see things differently. Like how before renewable energy, we need to renew our empathy. Because greed and money are the new entities, and they've been worshipped since the dawn of our century. It's been all praise to the new gods. If you're a man of the cloth is probably made by Gucci. It's truly a sacrilegious endeavor to want to better ourselves at the expense of our health, but we can't afford anything else because our systems assisting wealth building, not realizing our wealth is built in to our well-being. We're not seeing things clearly. Like how capitalism has become cannibalism of those in the lower strata of the economy. They gorge their stomachs off the performance of your employment. They wash it down with a tall glass of the working class's achievements. A slight tummy ache is equivalent to your workplace grievance. The air they pass is a greenhouse gas that we breathe in. It makes breathing a little bit harder. It makes me think that the ship of civilization won't be able to dock in the next harbor with a population that harbors without throwing some overboard into the cold, polluted waters. If this life-giving earth is our mother, then death would have to be our father, waiting for his wayward son to come home. Mother Nature, I beg you, please take care of your own children. before they turn themselves into orphans. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the power of the spoken word. The Honorable Philip J. Pierre, Prime Minister of St. Lucia, was elected on July 26, 2021. Prime Minister Pierre also serves as the Minister for Finance, Economic Development, and the Youth Economy, and is the CARICOM Prime Ministerial Quasi-Cabinet Lead on Sustainable Development, including environment, water, and disaster management. The Honorable Philip J. Pierre will be sharing important remarks on the alignment of this initiative with the comprehensive disaster management strategy of the Caribbean region. Welcome, Honorable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much. Let me absorb the protocol already established, but let me pay special mention to Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honorable Mia Mottley, and the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, and Dr. Carla Barnett of CARICOM. The Caribbean region is blessed with immense natural beauty, but is considered to be an active area globally for natural disasters. We are told that this region is the second most disaster-prone region in the world, and our countries experience a diversity of hazards, natural, biological, and environmental. Hurricanes tend to visit our shores regularly, causing extensive damage to physical infrastructure, and sometimes nearly wiping out the entire GDP of our country in loss and damage within hours. It is reported that Hurricane Maria's impact on Dominica was US 1.37 billion in damages. In Puerto Rico, it was 60 billion in damages after the passage of a hurricane. It is also known that in 2017, the 2017 hurricane season was the costliest on record, with close to US 300 billion in damages. And so, disaster risk reduction, mitigation, building resilience, and recovery have become top priority action areas for the survival of the Caribbean states. Target G of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction is to, and I quote, substantially increase the availability of and access to multi-hazard warning systems and disaster information and assessments to people by 2040. Note the emphasis on the word people. This is critical in the management of complex hazards, which are experienced by our Caribbean states and compounded by the negative impact of climate change. The UN General Secretary Early Warnings for All initiative will focus on multi-hazards. This multi-hazard early warning system correctly places emphasis on the safety of people. Early warning systems do not only save lives, but also provide vast economic benefits. They are considered to be low-hanging fruit for climate change adaptation because they are relatively cheap in comparison to the cost of dealing with the consequences of improper planning and preparedness. We are told by the WMO that just 24 hours notice of an impending hazardous event can cut the ensuing damage %. It is instructed global on losses of between 3 to 16 billion per annum. With hazards ranging from hurricanes, earthquakes, flooding, volcanic eruptions, health pandemics, and those related to pests and diseases on crops and livestock, there is no doubt that a multi-hazard approach is necessary, involving coordination across numerous national ministries and agencies, and also regional agencies, all effectively operating early warning systems to address the onslaught of hazards to which the Caribbean region is exposed. The Caribbean region must continue to implement measures to change our fortunes to become more resilient to natural disasters. Early warning systems, in conjunction with effective communication of environmental risks, is in many ways the key to impacting good social behavior and sensible actions among people. We must acknowledge that emergency management involves prevention, preparedness, response, mitigation, and recovery. However, the best disaster response is ensuring that we have the foresight to avoid it from the start or to take upfront measures to minimize the social and economic impact. The Regional Comprehensive Disaster Management Strategy is a Caribbean vehicle for the implementation of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. Priority 4 of the Comprehensive Disaster Management Strategy, CDM, recognizes the importance of early warning systems and specifically of ensuring that it is effective at a community level so that the most vulnerable are reached. Consistent with the targeted results of the CDM strategy, the CDMA unit, with the support of development partners, have made some significant investments in early warning systems, including governance dating back to 2014, when the Model Comprehensive Disaster Management legislation was enhanced to incorporate early warning system regulations. The Multi-Hazard Early Warning System checklist was revised in 2018 and further enhanced in 2021. The checklist has been applied in 7 CDMA participating states and is programmed to be applied in others. Work progressed towards the enhancement of an early warning system for the Caribbean region with the formation of the Regional Early Warning Systems Consortium, REWSC, in 2017. In 2022, CDMA World Bank Regional Summary Report on multi-hazard early warning checklists and analysis in the Caribbean identified priorities for improvements, including stronger integration of science and technology into the framework, taking into consideration the emerging realities of climate change. It is evident that we have made progress over the years, but there is still more to be done. The work of CDMA has shown that participating states the power of a regional approach to comprehensive disaster management. As such, investment in multi-hazard early warning systems remain a priority for CDMA. Participating states and is prominently featured in the CDMA Coordinating Unit Strategic Plan and associated work programs for 2022 to 2027. This provides an important avenue for implementation of the early warning systems for all initiative. CDMA looks forward to playing a leading role in the implementation of the early warning system for all initiative on behalf of its participating states in line with Target G of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister, for elaborating the context of this initiative within the framework of the Regional Comprehensive Disaster Management Strategy. And now, for our second cultural piece, join me in welcoming Mr. Sky Dowrich, who will be performing a piece called Caribbean Unity, written by Karine Clark. Miss.
Morning. You feel its warmth, its gentle touch, the everlasting hope. Oh, it means so much. A creative world, a vision so true, a paradise of wonders for you to be caught in the riches of glories untold of the people in the Caribbean. United in the Caribbean with more Caribbean beats. Yeah, join in musical matrimony. Oh, it's so sweet. Holding each other in a song under the morning sun. will spread its love across the world. I'm sure it will. Every boy and girl in one body, one love, one heart and one song, and speak to the people in many a song. Oh, don't be despair, for they understand that we're people of the Caribbean. United in the Caribbean with one Caribbean beat. Yeah, join in musical matrimony. Oh, it sounds so sweet. Holding each other in a song under the morning sun. Then our hearts can beat as one. For we united in the Caribbean. We have a task, is to be one. So get up, stand strong, lift up your hands and walk with pride. It's so good to be alive. Strengthen your body, your mind, and your soul. Spread your love, let this be your goal. Let your eyes be your light as we go day and night. They all understand that we're people of the Caribbean, united in the Caribbean with one Caribbean beat. Yeah, join in musical matrimony. Oh, it sounds so sweet. Holding each other in a song under the morning sun. Then our hearts can beat as one. So united in the Caribbean. United in the Caribbean with one Caribbean beat. Yeah, join in musical matrimony. Oh, it sounds so sweet. Holding each other in a song under the morning sun. Then our hearts can beat as one, for we're united in the Caribbean. Thank you.
What a powerful rendition of that Caribbean anthem. The Honorable Mia Amor Motley became Barbados' 8th and first female Prime Minister on May the 25th of 2018. She is one of the youngest persons ever to be assigned a ministerial portfolio, following appointment as Minister of Education, Youth Affairs and Culture from 1994 to 2001. She later served as Attorney General and Deputy Prime Minister of Barbados from 2001 to 2008, and was the first female to hold that position. A global force, creating new models and forecasts to trigger even further international shifts. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Mia Amor Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados.
Good morning to each and every one of you. But you will forgive me if I single out our three guests. I think that it is perhaps this that Owen Arthur and Dame Billy Miller had in mind when they agreed, when I was a young minister, to build this building, recognizing that a day would come when we might have to host not one, not two, but three of the very highest level appointed persons in the international public service, otherwise known as the United Nations. And it would therefore be remiss of me not to start off this morning by welcoming, first and foremost, it is true that they're all here for another meeting I have tomorrow as well, which I co-chair for the One Health Global Initiative. But I would like first to welcome the Director General of the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization. It is our distinct pleasure, truly, to have you here, and I look forward to meeting with you later. And then, of course, our dear friend Inga Anderson, who is the head of the United Nations Environmental Program, living in that other country that I also have cause to call home as well, in Kenya. And then, of course, our dear friend who is the boss today and who will this afternoon be, not afternoon, shortly, be among us in welcoming all of you in what really is truly an honor for this country, thank you, for this country to launch, Ms. Masturi, the first regional early warning systems launch after the agreement that was reached in Sharm el-Sheikh in Cairo. The two performances here this morning by Sky and Akeem show why we come to work every day, to be able to make this world, this country, a better place. The immense talent that was shared with you from this country this morning reminds us why individuals are so special. I want to thank Prime Minister Philip Pierre, who leads for us in the region the efforts on sustainable development, because in his efforts to help make this region more sustainable, there will be more skies and more Akeems who will continue not just to flourish for their own individual benefit or the benefit of this region, but as I have contended always, as a humanizing influence on the global population. That, perhaps, has been the Caribbean's greatest contribution in the post-independence environment, to be able to provide the thought leadership and the conscience that is often needed to remind us that people who see people want others to see people. People who hear people want others to hear people. And people who feel people want others to feel people. This Caribbean region, whether from the thought leadership of Sir Arthur Lewis and Derek Walcott in St. Lucia, or the very pragmatic and philosophical framework of an Errol Walton Barrow to remind us of being friends of all and satellites of none, or the scholarship of Eric Williams and the conscience of Michael Manley, this Caribbean region, through the likes of Usain Bolt, through the likes of Rihanna, continue to remind the world that it doesn't require large size or power to make a definable difference in the global condition. It is ironic that one of the things that we come, therefore, to say in this whole issue of the climate crisis is that it is regrettable that we are forced to face a double jeopardy, having been the ones whose blood, sweat, and tears financed the Industrial Revolution that is now the bane of planetary and human existence. The dignity that was robbed of us during that exercise is potentially going to be robbed again as a result of the climate crisis. And I want us to reflect on words from Maya Angelou, where she said, and I quote, "During bad circumstances, which is the human inheritance, you must decide not to be reduced. You have your humanity, and you must not allow anything to reduce that. We are obliged to know we are global citizens. Disasters remind us we are world citizens, whether we like it or not." Sky spoke to us this morning about unity, being united. I'd like to speak to you about being united in partnership, because it is only when we are united in partnership and we remove the divisions that have been foisted on us, whether by history or law or whatever, that we can come together to fight what is the greatest global challenge since human civilization has taken responsibility for itself. There may perhaps have been greater challenges for dinosaurs, but we know what happened to them. And we therefore have to ask ourselves, how do we give ourselves the best chance of survival? We do so first and foremost by working together. Working together across countries, working together across institutions, working together across communities, working together sectorally and across sectors, working together in settling the financing that remains absent, working together in settling the legislative framework and policy framework that is critical, working together at all levels. And the first thing, whether as an individual who suffers from addiction or as a country that is exposed to vulnerability, the first requirement is to know. Is to know. And if we do not know and accept, then we are at risk of anything that comes our way. And that, for me, is the essence of the early warnings framework that we are seeking to put across the world, as you heard from my dear sister Amina, as a matter of right and not as a perk or being in the right place at the right time to hear. This requires a complete change in how nations and institutions function. And that's why I keep using simple language about seeing, hearing, and feeling. Because once you see people and hear people and feel people, you plan for them. But if you don't see, hear, or feel them, you take them for granted. And therefore, fundamental to this is our basic humanity and values. Whether it is in Pakistan, from which you have just come, Inga, and 7 months later, the flood waters remain unabated in what can only be described as an apocalyptic crisis, not expected to be seen in our lives. Whether it is in other experiences, we have first and foremost to understand and value the appreciation of how our values locate us to act. That's why I call for global moral strategic leadership, because there must be a standard set from which all of the rest of us can manage and judge ourselves and our actions. And if that's set, Akim, the greed that you speak so wonderfully of in your spoken word can be addressed. And we then begin to understand that the only way greed can trump lives is in the alphabet, because G comes before L. We have to change how we think and act in this world if these actions are going to make a difference to the lives of so many. We talk about 1 in 3 in the Caribbean, and we talk about 6 out of every 10 in Africa not being able, and we can add Latin America in there. And why? Because if we don't get the fundamentals of development right, we can't get the settlement and mitigation of the crisis correct. Those who are on the front line are those who live precariously on mountain tops and on the sides of hills and mountains, as we discussed, on the banks of rivers, not because they do not know the risk, but because they do not have a choice more often than not. And that countries that even may want to do better have been robbed of the opportunities to be able to channel and funnel development to them in a way that makes sense. That's why the Bridgetown Initiative is so important to us. It's not just about climate. It's fundamentally about equity and fairness, justice and solidarity. How do we work together to allow countries to be able to better provide for those who cannot provide for themselves? And the early warning systems is just a small part of it all. And we know the benefit of it. We don't need anybody to tell us. We don't need to ask. If my hands are in the pockets, it's not because I am anything other than very cool. It's not meant to be disrespectful. But we don't need anybody to tell us. The truth is that we knew on the 31st of December, as I was driving in my car, 2019, feeling utterly optimistic about this country's development in 2020. We had just completed the second part of our debt restructuring. The first part completed in December 2018 for the domestic debt restructuring, the second part for the external debt restructuring. It was All Year's Day. I've learned now to hate All Year's Days. And those who are visiting will understand it, because the next All Year's Day I had to shut down the country for the pandemic. But I tell you these stories because you have to appreciate that life is not seen from speeches on a platform, but life is experienced on a daily basis. And what is the story that I tell you? That in this country, having listened to that BBC report, it stuck with me. And before the end of January, the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and all of the different departments started to put systems in place. By the beginning of February, we went, the Attorney General and myself, to Harrison's Point in St. Lucie, and I thank the European Investment Bank for coming in after and ratifying the expenditure that we made there to convert an old naval base into a hospital to prepare for COVID. I tell this story because anyone who knows my country, who knows Barbados, will tell you that with a single acute primary to tertiary hospital in the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, that if we had ever left that institution to be the place where we managed COVID from for 3 years and continuing, that God knows what would have happened to this country, particularly given the density of housing in the coastal areas where the majority of people live in this country. The ability to plan, the ability to prepare, the ability to put in play 4 times the amount of ICU beds that the country had and had had for 50 years made all of the difference to us. Fast forward then to 2021 June. I'm up 12:30 at night preparing for cabinet the next morning. And I hear bowels roaring. And I assume that somebody on the highway is playing the fool, even though it was late at night. it turned out to be the beginnings of a 90-minute freak storm that would have, 46,000 lightning strikes, Sabu, in 90 minutes? Almost like a natural strobe light in a discotheque, because it never stopped. But you knew it wasn't constant because the eye still caught the flash. And the rain was horizontal, and by the next morning, there were at least 25, 27 houses, I can't remember, that were completely flattened. I remember visiting an elderly man who, to this day, God bless him, he stood in his kitchen, and then he moved when he realized that that structure would go completely. And he went under the cellar of the house until he could find that opportunity just to cross the road and go into his neighbor's garage. Front page of the Nation newspaper has a picture of him. But I knew what he felt, because I happened to be in Jamaica. My first trip to Jamaica was the weekend of Hurricane Gilbert. It is true that I have to ask myself how I fall in love with Jamaica so, because on that first afternoon I was pickpocketed. And by the Sunday, Gilbert hit. And by the Monday, I had gastro. And before the gastro, I stood up on Hope Road for 2.5 hours, because nobody in Jamaica believed that a hurricane was coming, because they had not had a serious hurricane since the 1960s. I was at a 50th birthday party, and everyone said, nah, man, no hurricane not hit Jamaica. Jamaica safe, sir. I was to go to the Blue Mountains that day. Still have not reached. I say this because even when you provide the warnings, if you do not have partnerships, if you don't have the reinforcing community education, if you don't have the plans that cause people to know that you are serious, the warnings will fall on deaf ears. We speak this morning in Barbados, but we extend deepest sympathy on our behalf, all of us, to the people of Turkey and Syria. And the numbers keep rising, and just before I came to get up to give the speech, the last number is 2,300 and rising. And why? Because even with the best early warning systems, there are some hazards that are difficult to manage. And when those things happen, when the human body is at rest, in other words, sleeping, the scale of destruction will always be greater. Potentially, same thing with that freak storm that I described. I have shown you what happens as with the pandemic, but I can go further. The Inter-American Development Bank, and I thank them, was instrumental in helping this country develop the National Coastal Risk Information and Planning Platform, what we call the NCRIP. I had to look down because you get so accustomed to acronyms that you forget what it is. But that is not a static instrument. And this is why the Bridgetown Initiative is so important. Because at almost all levels, the inability to parse development, as institutions sometimes, and particularly financial institutions would have us do, puts us deeper at risk. Because if you can't parse development for them and fit into neat boxes, you can't benefit. And even when you benefit, there's a belief that development can be done with 7-year and 10-year money. Well, the British government discovered in World War I, after World War I, that that was impossible. And having raised 2 bonds in 1914 and 1917, found themselves renegotiating those bonds in 1932 into effectively a 100-year bond, because you could not pay for the cost of war while paying for the cost of rebuilding from the war at the same time. It is no different in these small island developing states or developing countries globally. And we believe that our efforts for preparation and mitigation started only since Paris Agreement. Except that I'm here to tell you, and we can carry you, to show that from the middle of the 1980s, with the establishment of the Coastal Zone Management Unit, our country has been borrowing money, hundreds of millions of dollars from the IDB, to protect our coastal infrastructure, not only because we have a coastal economy, but because our major aquifers, particularly for the north of the country, are all coastal. And if the water in there becomes affected by high levels of salinity, you can kiss it all goodbye. And you then transfer yourself to a desal platform that is multiple times more expensive for the country in terms of competitiveness, but above all, for the families in the households who need water. I say these things because it is only through partnership at the community level and the family with our emergency management services, preparing people for the possibility of the risk, for the reality of the risk, and the possibility of it becoming real. Our emergency management services must perfect the art of knowing who they are looking for and what they need, both before, sometimes during, regrettably, to save lives, and definitely after. Just after, or not just after, just before Cricket World Cup, when I had the responsibility of chairing for security for 10 countries, we put in place, and we used the opportunity to put in place a treaty that the people of Dominica benefited from after Hurricane Maria. A treaty that went beyond the regional security system, that said that countries in the Caribbean region will come to each other's aid in the event of natural disaster and civil unrest, so that the Jamaica Defense Force, the Trinidad Defense Force, the Guyanese Defense Force, and others could be mobilized at a minute's notice in order to support each other. And where the absence of the early warning signals cannot reach people, because we have another problem that we're not confronting. Before, most countries in the world benefited from broadcasting. But today we have narrowcasting and fake news. And the partnerships that are needed today at the global level and at the regional and national levels are therefore different. We need a validation or verification system, both from our telecoms providers and the social media providers, that this warning is not fake news, and that this warning is real. And the belief that everybody listens to a national broadcaster anymore has been exploded long time, because people listen and function in the spaces where they get information, real or fake, but they believe it, and their comfort levels are there. So if you live in the hills somewhere, all you're doing is listening to YouTube and Dennis Brown and some good old school reggae, how are you going to hear? So what are the signals that take into account the modification of behavior and the modification of information that we have? At the same time, we also need partnerships within the region. And this notion about who is English, who is French, or who is Spanish, and who is Dutch speaking needs to be exploded, because the disasters and the hurricanes and them don't speak no language. They speak one language: destruction. And the quicker we come to realize that and cooperate, the better. I suspect that at the level of the military, there is far more cooperation than at the level of civil society. And we need to bridge the gap for civil society in order to be able to do so. SEDIMA is doing its best and doing a wonderful job, Liz, in doing what you're doing, and I want to thank the World Food Program as well for choosing Barbados to preposition food to ensure that we have that capacity to respond. But the region needs to go even further. We need a recovery ship. I don't know what's the fancy language for it. But islands don't have the benefit of road networks to deliver quickly. And in some instances, runways will be destroyed in disasters. And there are ships that flow and go around the world. Some are hospital ships, but we need more than a hospital ship because we need a ship to provide fresh water. Immediately after a disaster, I can tell you firsthand from being in Jamaica, in Gilbert. Mercifully, I've never had more than a Category 1 hurricane in Barbados. But I've known what it is to experience hurricanes in Jamaica, Miami, and London, and New York. True, true, true. 1976 New York, 1988 London, Gilbert later, and Miami multiple times in the 2000s. We need to coordinate as CARICOM to work with the international community to ensure that there are two ships prepositioned, the north and the south. And why two? Because hurricanes do move quickly and quicker than ships. And therefore, Commodore, I'm sure that you would want the capacity to be able, because you will not always be able to land a plane where you need to go. And the ability to have access to clean water urgently in those first few weeks is critical if we are to avoid cholera. We also need to recognize that arbitrary numbers for debt sustainability in the context of small island developing states does not work. I told you that we have been doing coastal preparation since the 80s. Part of our debt is, in fact, to prevent the worst to our coastal environment. For every dollar of prevention, you save $7 in recovery expenditure. We know that. But when you are then told that your debt to GDP does not admit of you spending enough money to renew a school infrastructure that is more than 150, 200 years, 250 years in some instances, how then do you provide the support systems for people to be relocated, both pre and in many instances post-disaster? We do not have the capacity genuinely to withstand serious hurricanes in this region that are Category 3 and upwards. And if the international community does not understand that, then they do not understand our circumstances. And if the international community does not understand that both with the absence of a pact upon becoming independent, where after centuries of extraction of wealth, we were left just to face, as best we can, the needs of housing and education and health, with a treasury that had been emptied for centuries, then only to be foisted with international rules that are one size fits all, like that from the WTO that does not recognize special and differential treatment, but yet having now to allocate additional funding for environmental matters that were not even in circumstances where the allocation of funding for basic traditional human rights and development was already challenged, makes this journey even more complex. And when we understand that the cause of it is not our behavior or our values or our attitudes, then we have a crisis. Problem is that the crisis isn't unique to us. We are just the canaries. And whatever we thought before, 2022 put paid, I suspect, to many people's doubts. Third World in 1970s told us that the definition of real heat was 96 degrees in the shade. London and Europe told us differently last year when 108 and 110 degrees became the standard. In the winter, the notion that a state in the United States of America could be 30 degrees from the temperatures on Mars is a sci-fi movie or book. Not the reality of what we saw in December, someone would argue, but unfortunately it was. Because when we start to get at minus 59 degrees, we know we are in dangerous territory. I want to thank the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres for his continued courage and compassion, his values, and his global moral strategic leadership. But I ask all of us, at whatever stance we find ourselves, at whatever position, to recognize that it is in doing these practical things, which yes, do require funding, and yes, it does require $3 billion, and yes, the United Nations has not completed the fundraising for it, for those who hear my voice. And if we could do better, we would for you. That is the truth. Because even when we received 100,000 vaccines, in the heart of it, we distributed out of that over 25,000 to our brothers and sisters in the region, because we are nothing if we want to walk this journey alone. But we have now to do these small concrete things that will make a difference to the lives of many. And we will continue to fight for the adaptation funding, and we will continue to fight for the concessional funding, and we will continue to fight for the fiscal space, because even if you give me all of the funding, and I have no fiscal space because of arbitrary metrics for debt sustainability, because every dollar of debt is not the same. Even if we do all of these things, there are still going to be some people who we have not reached. And that is why then the human partnership at the level of the community becomes so critical. And that doesn't require a leader, a prime minister, or anybody. It requires the average citizen in our region and across the world to spread the message and to let people know that, like with everything else we know, prevention is always better than cure. And that secondly, awareness, whether as an addict, as a vulnerable person, or as a powerful person, the first step is to know and to remain engaged. I hope that the launching of this early warning system in our country, Barbados, as a first regional launch globally, in the presence of 3 distinguished United Nations leaders, as fate would have it, plus all of the diplomatic corps and all of the local persons, that we also in this room send the message that partnership is real, but it is not yet at the levels that we need it. And if we can continue to build those partnerships from the community and the family right back up to the international level, then the spectacle of us failing can be left for the books and not become our reality. But never let us be so arrogant as to believe that it cannot happen. The earthquake last night was an awful reminder that there were people who were having lunch yesterday with their families and who made plans to do things this morning that they are no longer in a position to do because the family has been destroyed and the businesses affected have been destroyed. And the shadow of that destruction will be far longer than the news story that reports it this morning. I hope and pray that those who hear our voices understand that these are not now speeches for the sake of speeches, but that this is speeches to propel action and partnership. And I thank you once again, therefore, for choosing this country to help send that message, because we know, as I said, that it is real. And we must never be arrogant enough to believe that it cannot happen to us. For this world knows that there are extinct species. I referred to the dinosaurs just now. And this world knows that there are failed states and failed civilizations. Let us work in partnership to ensure that there is no further record of failed species or failed civilizations, or worse, at the individual level, loss of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister, for that powerful message of change, humanity, partnership, and action. We now transition into segment 2 of this morning's proceedings. And I want to welcome Mr. Didier Tribuc, who is the United Nations Resident Coordinator for Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean since January of 2019. He brings more than 20 years of experience in the development and humanitarian realm, working with the United Nations and international NGOs such as the French Red Cross and Médecins Sans Frontières. Mr. Tribuc, I welcome you to the podium to take us into segment 2.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you very much, Liz, for taking us through this first segment. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the second segment and panel discussion. We have with us highly distinguished speakers precisely to discuss the keys of success of the early warnings for all initiative here in the Caribbean, but it seeds as well in general. And it's very fitting because the need for inclusive and accessible multi-hazard early warning system is really urgent, as we have heard this morning. Disasters have increased fivefold globally, driven in part by human-induced climate change crisis and resulting in even more intense weather events, besides other disasters such as, of course, pandemic, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, which we have experienced less than 2 years ago here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. But fortunately, as we have also seen in the Caribbean, early warning systems have progressed. With roadmaps, for example, that have been completed in 7 CDMA participating states. Most of the countries also have technical capacities for monitoring and forecasting hydrometeorological hazards and to launch related warnings. However, the case is quite different when reviewing the existing capacities for geological, biological, or technological hazards. And there also exist gaps for the dissemination of warning, especially to ensure that the last mile coverage is done to ensure that no one is left behind. And this is really at the core of this early warning system initiative that wants to ensure universal coverage within 5 years. And we hope that we'll discuss also in this panel today the financial sustainability with increasing financing from Caribbean government with the partners, development partners, and the UN partnership is really at the core of this initiative. So in this context, we have the privilege to count today with a panel of leaders fully engaged in the Early Warning for All initiative. Online, we have Professor Petteri Talas, Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization, who is connected from Geneva. We have with us Mr. Kyu Dong-Yu, Director General of the Food and Agricultural Organization. Welcome to join the podium, sir. Ms. Inger Andersen, Executive Director of the UN Environment Programme. Ms. Mami Misutori, Special Representative of the Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction and Head of UNDRR. Ambassador Gerard O from the UK, who is also the chair of the Climate Risk and Early Warning System, CRUISE initiative. Good morning, all. And we also have online Ms. Shajoni Gums, Comprehensive Disaster Management Youth Ambassador, joining us online from St. Kitts and Nevis. So, good morning, all. We start the panel discussion with the intervention of you, Mr. Kyu Dong-Yu. As I said, Mr. Kyu is Director General of the FAO. Before coming to FAO, Mr. Kyu served as China's Vice Minister of Agriculture and Rural Affairs. Mr. Kyu, we understand you will have to leave for another very important meeting, but before that, thank you for joining us. And could you kindly let us know briefly how, in your view, the initiative would contribute to the agri-food system transformation, as well as, most importantly, to food security in the context of seeds and also in the Caribbean? The floor is yours, sir.
First of all, I would like to appreciate the invitation by the Prime Minister Barbados, and also appreciate her contribution to the co-chair of a global leadership group on AMR. Because since I came to FAO about 4 years ago, we are really set the tone together with members. FAO have 194 members. Work together, we now have a 10 years strategy framework, how to transform agro-food system together, more efficient, more inclusive, more resilient, and more sustainable for better production, better nutrition, better environment, better life, leaving no one behind. But One Health approach, and also we established the new office for the emergency and the resilience. So that's really fit the purpose of all the early warning system. We work together with and the Secretary of Martin and the former Secretary Mark Lockhart together how to establish early warning system in agro-food system and rural areas. Second, also, we are now also establishing the office for the seeds, and LDCs. We pay special attention to the seed countries, and because you face the challenges, as you said many times, also 3C, climate crisis and the COVID-19, and also the conflict. But luckily, in the small island state, you don't have that much conflict. So it's good. But for you, mainly the climate crisis, and also how to build up more sustainable agro-food systems, and also build up more resilient economic systems. That's FAO. We are willing to work closely with members. By the new strategies we endorsed on the climate change and innovation science, and also new strategy on the private engagement. So, and then we can build up the integrated, coherent, the solution to support the members to establish a new and resilient agro-food system for improvement of livelihood. And that's, I think, for the early warning system for all should be included agriculture. That's agriculture included the crop, animals, forestry, and fishery and aquaculture. So that's something we have to work together with my sister agencies, and also especially with the private sectors and the academies and NGOs by hand-in-hand initiatives. So we established a World Food Forum, and 2 years now attract last year more than 41,000 participants. So based on the hybrid model, so virtual and in-person in Rome. So let's work together. And the big UN family. So, and that's the only solution, as Prime Minister pointed out. Together, we can go far, and we can go better.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for reminding us that let's work together. This initiative is really about partnership. Thank you for joining us. I believe you have to...
Yes, so because it's running a little bit late. So we show the, we close the corporate with also UNEP and others, and on the biodiversity, COP27, COP26, COP28 coming, and also COP15 and the biodiversity. May I use 1 minute? So what is a special value? I know there are a lot of representatives from countries. What is special value for the seeds? There are 2 areas on this planet. One is a seed country, and another is a highland, landlocked countries. It's less developed, less industrialized. So the most important value is biodiversity. Because I was a genetics, and so we know what is the real value for the future. And also we know the dinosaurs why distinct, not because they are not strong, because they are not adapted, the evolution. So that's tell us we have to respect the nature, and we get adaptation and to the evolution. So they make use of biodiversity, and for food diversity, and for the solution of the sustainable development goals. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Q. The Early Warning for All initiative is co-led by the World Meteorological Organization and the UN Disaster Risk Reduction, and is also implemented with the support of the whole United Nations development system, notably in close collaboration with ITU and the IFRC, who are also with us in the room today. So Professor Petteri Talas is the Secretary General of the WMO since 2016. Before, he was Director General of the Finnish Meteorological Institute. So Professor Talas, we're all together for this launch today. And can you give us briefly a summary of the main objectives and pillars of the Executive Action Plan for the Early Warning for All initiative, with some perspective in your views on what matters for the Caribbean and seas?
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. And I'm sorry that I cannot be with you at the nice island, and thanks for the Prime Minister for hosting this important event at your island. And the islands are very much in the minds of WMO. We all remember this 2017 hurricane season when we broke all-time economic losses high worldwide. There was even losses up to 800% of GDP in one day, and that happened at Dominica. And unfortunately, because of the warming of the ocean, the potential for such events is still fairly high. 90% of the disasters, they are related to weather. Of course, now we are facing a very dramatic event in Turkey, but one should keep in mind that 90% are related to weather. And many of our less developed country members don't have proper early warning services, the meteorological or hydrological services in place, and that's why Secretary General Guterres has given us as WMO a mandate to prepare an action plan, which was endorsed by COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. And we are lucky to have good partners on board, UNDRR, ITU, and IFRC as good examples. And we have been planning this concrete action, and it seems that the COP28 presidency is also very interested in promotion of our initiative. And I visited Arab Emirates 3 weeks ago and had a chance to discuss with the president of the forthcoming COP28, and they are very happy with the idea. And the basic plan is that we should invest $1.5 billion during the coming 5 years for basic observing infrastructures, for IT infrastructures, and manpower at the meteorological and hydrological services, and about the same sum in preparedness, emergency management, and also telecommunication systems. We are lucky that we already have 2 programs in place. The government of France initiated a program called CRUISE, Climate Risk and Early Warning Services, and through that instrument, which is a joint one of WMO, UNDRR, and World Bank, we have been able to assist already several countries. As part of this early warning service initiative, we have to focus more resources in single countries and to see the major change, to have proper multi-hazard early warning services in place, and also to be able to forecast the impacts of those events. Then we have to invest also in the basic observing infrastructures. We have major gaps in the basic meteorological observing systems in island states, Caribbean, Pacific, and Africa. And for that purpose, we have already a program called SOF in place, a systematic observation financing facility, and it's now financed by several European countries and also United States and Canada. And we expect to see support for these activities also from Japan, which I will visit in a week from now. And also China has indicated that they are willing to support those activities financially. We have also had the interaction with private sector, and for example, players like Microsoft, Google, and Meta, they are also interested in being part of the solution, which are good news. And we are heading towards the launch of these early warning services for all program in New York, attached to the forthcoming UN Water Conference, which takes place 22nd to 24th of March. And Secretary General Guterres has agreed to join that event, and then we can go to finally to the implementation. And we are most happy to do it as a joint venture between our partners, with our partners. And from our side, we also have one dream that we could be able to go to higher resolution of climate modeling in the future. At the moment, we are not able to describe these weather extremes or the water cycle in a proper way with the current climate models, and that's why our dream is to build a new first virtual center and finally physical center to have the biggest possible supercomputing facilities to estimate what kind of risks we are going to face in the future. And unfortunately, with the current climate models, we are not able to describe those risks in a proper way. But thanks again for the government of Barbados for hosting this event, and we are very eager to contribute to the success of your country and also many other countries in the Caribbean, Pacific regions, and Africa especially. Thank you.
I would like to introduce those who was referred as the boss for today's event by Prime Minister Mia Mottley. Ms. Mami Misutori, Special Representative of the Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction and Head of UNDRR. Prior to joining the UN, Ms. Misutori was Executive Director of the Sainsbury Institute of the Study of Japanese Arts and Culture at the University of East Anglia in the UK. Mami, can you tell us which lines of effort must be accomplished for achieving the ambitious target of universal coverage of the multi-hazard early warning system set by the UN Secretary General by 2027?
Thank you, Didier. So what are the lines of efforts that we need to take forward collectively? That's an important question, isn't it? But I must start by saying that in Sharm el-Sheikh, when we had a chat, I asked Didier, I want to have this first regional launch in the Caribbean. Can you convince the Prime Minister to be with us And so you made it happen, so thank you very much. It made all the difference. And it's great to be here with all the partners, not only those that you've mentioned, but of course, Inga, UNEP is a big part of this, and UNDP, and of course, CRUISE as well. There are 3 lines of efforts that I can think of, which needs to be taken forward simultaneously. One is international cooperation, obvious, but of course. So $3.1 billion, Amina said it's just, but it's not a small amount of money. But we need this coming in quickly. And it's not only financial support, it's also transfer of technology and expertise. Because many times, if you don't have this coming in, you cannot sustain early warning systems. And importantly on this point, I would like to make a request to the member states of the Caribbean, but also all the UN system here, to let us collectively understand the current status of early warning in this region and each country. Because if we don't understand what are the gaps and where do we need to put in the international cooperation, then we are not doing our job correctly. For this, we need quite granular data of the 4 pillars that Petri was just talking about risk information, about the forecasting, about the distribution of warning, and about the early action on the ground, the preparedness on the ground. And I know that a lot of data is around us. The governments have them, local governments have them, UN system has this, regional organizations have them. We need to put this all together to understand so that international cooperation goes to the place where it is needed now. The second line of effort is the regional component, the regional collective effort that needs to take forward this initiative. And that is why the Caribbean, I think, is in such a good place, because you have very strong regional organizations and regional initiatives, SEDIMA, the Regional Meteorological Organization, but also we have the CRUISE Caribbean Initiative. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel with this initiative. We need to build on what is already there and the advances made. And here the regional component is good, important, especially to, at the end of the day, the ownership is with the region, because that is so important. The ownership needs to be with the region. And again, another thing is that as we know, and as the Prime Minister said, disasters don't respect borders or difference of language. It comes and it destroys different countries in the region at the same time. So without this regional component, we can't take this forward. The third thing I would say, and maybe most important, is the political will at the national and community level. We have seen it today demonstrated by the Prime Minister. We have also heard from the Prime Minister of St. Lucia, and it's very encouraging that we heard also from the Secretary General of CARICOM, because the political will, and also we need to think about the mayors too, and the community leaders. If these political leadership and the willingness doesn't come from the highest, but also the highest at the community level, then we can't take this forward. And we saw great examples today by Prime Minister Motley and Prime Minister Philippe. So we do need to see this replicated in the whole region. I would say that these are the 3 things that we need to do simultaneously. If we do it, as the Prime Minister said, we can do this.
Thank you. Thank you. Very clear. I'd like to turn to our next speaker, Ms. Inger Andersen. Inger is Under Secretary General of the United Nations, Executive Director of the UN Environment Programme. Prior to her UN appointment, Ms. Andersen was the Director General of the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN. Inger, I have a simple question for you. Why would you say that this initiative is important for reducing environmental hazards and ensuring sustainability?
Well, I think, first of all, I should pay tribute to my dear colleague, Mami, who has been really leading this, and bravo to you. Also, of course, to the Prime Minister of St. Lucia, as well as, of course, our host here, Prime Minister Mia Motley. I think understanding that everything environmental today permeates politics, I think that's what this today is all about. when a country gets smashed up by a hurricane, by an earthquake, and our hearts go to the people in Syria and in Turkey this morning. But when a country gets smashed by something that comes their way in the form of a disaster, lots of things happen to the environment. The debris, the toxic plants that got washed out, the impacts that it's on that coastal forest, on that estuary, that now all of a sudden changes its course, moving water a different direction than what it was before the storm. Understanding, therefore, that that catastrophe that first and foremost hit people, hit the environment, and when the environment again hits, it hits people back again in the long-term toxicity that we leave on the environment. So that's why we from UNEP very much feel that the work of our colleagues at UNDRR, the work of our colleagues at the WMO is so important, because getting early warning means that you can begin to prepare, means that in the kind of investments you do, you create resilience around them. You understand that that which was perhaps a 100-year storm, now is i.e. it would come likely in all projections every 100 years. Today is a 5-year storm, i.e. it is coming much more frequently. And that is what we heard from the Prime Minister. So this initiative, Early Warning Initiative for All, makes great sense. And of course, who's at the front line of these weather-related events? It is the most vulnerable. It is the SIDS. It is the small landlocked developing nations, those countries that are already struggling with the elements in which they thrive. And so understanding that then, that the cost of these, the post-disaster repair is, yes, the human infrastructure, but also the environmental infrastructure that in a sense protects us all. And so looking at this region, which has already been exposed to very, very high impact from COVID, we heard that from the Prime Minister, to very high impact from the prevailing assessment of how we measure debt sustainability, which the Prime Minister is rightly arguing is false and cannot be sustained. And that's why the importance of the Bridgetown Initiative is there. But understanding then that these countries are just squeezed on every side. And right now, ladies and gentlemen, we are on a trajectory. Right now, our emissions are up. Our carbon usage is up globally. We're using more oil and gas and coal than we ever were before. UNEP projections would take us at 2100 to a 2.7 to a 2.8 degree world. We're living in a 1.2 degree world, and look at the disasters coming our way. And we understand that between 75 to 85% of all carbon emissions are just from 20 countries, the G20, some with a longer historical track records than others. The reality, therefore, is that climate action is an absolute must. And it is the smaller, poorer countries that are paying the price. We at UNEP are very active in this space. We approved a $47 million program for the Pacific Islands, for 5 Pacific countries. It was funded by the GCF. It's Cook Islands, Niue, Palau, Marshall Islands, and Tuvalu. And that 47 million, yes, in part will go to early warning, but in part will also go to investing in resilience, using nature-based solutions, mangroves, coastal forests, coral reefs, nature that can be that lungs that absorb those winds and the high storms, be that space that can take and be the buffer between the wrath of the ocean and the winds and climate change and humanity. So working with nature is the way that we can protect ourselves. But nature, as long as we ignore it, will send us these invoices. And the invoices will come in the form of storms, fires, floods, droughts. I live in Kenya, as the Prime Minister referred to. We are in the 4th year of a drought. 4th year. 2.5 million heads of cattle have died in the north of our country, the headquarters of UNEP. I came just from Pakistan, and I was whispering to the Prime Minister because she asked, right now, Pakistan is still underwater. 7 months later. So we have landed the loss and damage fund. Fine, we have to capitalize it now because the costs are not going up. So this part of the, as the Prime Minister said, a small but essential gear in the wheel of meeting the onslaught of climate change is so essential, because warning is knowing, and knowing is preparation. And so we from UNEP, we're really pleased to be here to support UNDRR, our friends from WMO, and of course, the Caribbean nations as they step forward in leadership at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Inger, and thanks for reminding us that nature is our ally, and we have to look for nature-based solutions as well. I would like to turn to Ambassador Gerard O, who is the chair of the Cruise and head of the Adaptation, Nature and Resilience Department of UK's FCDO, Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. He also served as Deputy Director for the Scottish Government for the organisation preparation of the COP26. Mr. O, reaching the main objective of this initiative will be, as we know, only possible if it relies on the appropriate governance mechanisms at country level, at regional level, and of course if the investments are sustainable with the necessary partnerships. So can you tell us how Cruise is supporting this initiative around those two aspects in particular?
Many thanks indeed, Didier. And let me just echo my thanks as well to the Government of Barbados, to SEDIMA, CARICOM, UNDRR and WMO for their leadership in organising this event, which those not in the room, the palpable sense of motivation and excitement from the Prime Minister's inspirational words really resonated here. And I think it's a real privilege to be here to see that connection now being made between the Secretary-General's ambition and the institutions and the capabilities here in the Caribbean to really feel part of that call of Prime Minister Mia to propelling action and partnership, to feel the force of political will that is such an essential mix in moving this forward. If I can, I'll say a few things about Cruise, because it's been mentioned a couple of times, and then talk about some of the approach that Cruise is taking. But I also would like to echo Amina Mohammed's notice that early warnings for all are not only a necessity, but also a right. So beginning from that point is extremely important. So the Climate Risk and Early Warnings Initiative was founded in 2015 with the aim of bridging the early warning gap and building early warning systems to make a meaningful difference at scale. And contributions to the system so far include Australia, Canada, France, Finland, Germany, the European Commission, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Switzerland and the UK. So it's a coming together of countries who want to work collaboratively to help advance early warning systems. And we're really delighted that since that time, Cruise's initial target of raising $100 million has been reached. We saw further commitments at COP27, and we're going to see further commitments this year, coming year. And I'm particularly delighted to be here in the Caribbean because Cruise is being able to fund a wide range of important early warnings initiatives here, including a strategic roadmap for enhancing multi-hazard early warning systems, flood strategies at national level, work on inclusion and capacity building. And in doing so, we have worked right alongside key regional partners, including SEDIMA and national governments. And I'm also really pleased that we've identified the Caribbean as a priority region for additional funding into the future. I think, as we heard, the opportunity of early warning for all is the political momentum and that harnessing of ambition, attention and finance that can bring. And crucially, to bring that to the standing aspirations, vision and capabilities that we see here in the Caribbean, the implementation by national governments, regional bodies, partners in the private sector and civil society. And we in Cruise are completely committed to standing behind and with partners as they move in that implementation of building early warning systems for all and that are meaningful to local people facing the choices, as Prime Minister Motley illustrated earlier on. And so in order to be as effective as possible, there are at least 5 areas that Cruise will seek to contribute. The first is that we'll continue to bring finance for national and regional early warning systems and crucially aim to expand and scale successful initiatives, including through partnerships with key multilateral bodies and funds, and build a mosaic of early warning financing at scale, and for sustainability, a crucial point that we all need to focus on as we make early warnings for all a sustainable initiative for now and into the future. The second thing we'll do is we'll work to improve collaboration, taking a whole value chain approach, working closely with our colleagues, as Professor Tallis has said, on systematic observation and financing facility, by understanding and approaching early warning for all as a truly interdependent system, not four pillars, but something that is bound together with horizontal working and collaboration and initiatives, and by working with organisations that truly connect with communities and the choices they face. And the UK, speaking as our own part, will use its co-chairing of the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership, REAP, alongside St Lucia to contribute to this aim. Thirdly, we'll continue to finance and advocate for early warning systems that hold people at the very centre and integrate a people-centred approach, recognising, I think as we all do, that systems are only effective when they enable people to make meaningful choices that reduce risk. And that means testing assumptions about what happens between national bodies and community and households, understanding the choices that individuals make when they're facing risk, and thinking that through and connecting a whole system approach to this. Fourthly, we'll continue to find ways to engage with the commitment, the ambition, the innovation from our private sector colleagues. And I'm really pleased we've been able to do that here in the Caribbean, working with regional chambers of industry and commerce to begin a new dialogue about how to build early warning systems that have coverage. And finally, and really importantly, we've heard a lot of this today, and it's quite right, Cruse will continue to fund and support and advocate for initiative and action led and owned by regional and national institutions, because that is where the understanding of context is. That's where the political ownership, as we've seen so strongly today, lies, and where sustainability of building these systems over time to address a range of multi-hazards lies. And so we look forward to working with all the people in this room here today, including CDEMA, the Caribbean Meteorological and Hydrological Institute, Caribbean Community Climate Change Centre, and our partners here represented, so that we can achieve lasting and effective early warning systems for all, globally and here in the Caribbean. Thank you, Didier.
Thank you very much, Gerard. I would like to invite our last but not least panelist, Ms. Sejuni Gums. She is Comprehensive Disaster Management Youth Ambassador in St. Kitts and Nevis. Sejuni is also a National Emergency Management Authority volunteer. Can you, Sejuni, tell us or give us some recommendations to make sure that throughout the implementation of this initiative from the youth perspective, we leave no one behind?
Yes. Firstly, the sensitization of early warning systems amongst the youth is pivotal. Providing us with information such as the 4 elements of an early warning system, which are risk knowledge, monitoring and warning services, dissemination and communication, and response capability. Early warning systems are an effective tool to reduce vulnerabilities and improve preparedness and response to natural hazards. As a youth, I must say the most important aspect is to ensure that we have the youth involved in dissemination and communication and response capability. All stakeholders must understand the importance of our involvement in all sectors, both public and private, internationally, whether it's through the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, regionally, whether it's within the Caribbean Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology, and by extension such as CDEMA, and locally through Met offices. Now, the purpose of our involvement can begin with volunteerism, with adequate training in the various areas so that we can be seen as agents for recommendations and operational support. The best way to provide recommendations is by being aware of the information and given the opportunity to make necessary suggestions. We can aid with the creation of educational messages and campaigns to ensure that they are more appealing to persons who are similar to us. Then, we can aid in the dissemination of warnings to our families, social networks, and through social media. We can also build awareness of risks and strengthen the capacity to manage them. For instance, the creation of the St. Kitts Nevis Comprehensive Disaster Management Youth Ambassadors was created to do just that. Youths can ensure that these systems are user-friendly and incorporate all personnel who are affected, such as the elderly, disabled, vulnerable, and those who may not be as technologically inclined, by doing multiple pre-tests of the system, as sometimes we have more available time. Moreover, by doing this, we can ensure that there's an all-of-society approach that incorporates different cultures, religions, and languages, including youths that are from various backgrounds, can ensure that the messaging is not solely catered to one demography. Additionally, to aid in the process of responding by helping people when that time comes as a certified first responder. This is seen in St. Kitts and Nevis, where there are youth volunteers in each community. Moreover, this can combat the challenges of having several impediments affecting the ability to target communities to respond when confronted with the early warning, risk perception, as we can help in informing our peers, inefficient community chain, limited resources to respond, as we can help with increasing the numbers, little knowledge of evacuation, and other areas we can assist by having necessary community walks. Furthermore, we can ensure that there is a multi-hazard approach. This ensures that the economy will be resilient and stable. How? We can ensure that there's a use of not only traditional methods, but non-traditional methods which complement each other. On one end, traditional methods such as bells, town criers, television broadcasts, and radio. We can provide additional support to ensure that messages are also available on media consumed by the youth. Information that will be readily available and easy to comprehend. All messaging systems will have the flexibility to be redundant. Redundancy will ensure that we have many options in times of crisis where, if one system happens to be non-functional, then there are other systems in place that have the same information. With the all-society approach, these systems will not only broadcast in one language, but in various languages that caters to the country's population. To ensure the effectiveness of the early warning systems, there's a need to actively involve the people of the communities at risk from a wide range of hazards, facilitate public education and awareness of risk, disseminate messages and warning efficiently, and ensure that there is a constant state of preparedness and that early action is enabled. The best way to ensure this is effective is by having youth volunteers who can assist the organizations in executing their goals. There can also be activities done that are targeted to the communities, schools, and workplaces to ensure that there is adequate reach by having drills. Sustainability is also important. We as youths want to feel valued. Therefore, allow us the opportunities to be trained, certified, and once proven, provided with the opportunities to further our education and potentially job opportunities, as over time, with the experience, we'll be best suited for the positions. Now, with a cycle like this, messaging will always be up to date, the carriers will always see the value, and sustainability will be effective.
Thank you, Sajuni. I'm told that we have in the audience Mr. Ariel Kenston, who is the head of the country's cluster support team for the Anglo-Caribbean of the International Federation of the Red Cross and the Red Cross Society. You wanted to make some comments on the comments made.
Thank you very much. Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much. We very much thank you for accommodating us in today's agenda. And of course, I need to congratulate you for the choice of color of tie for the launch. Very appropriate. The IFRC, the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Society, welcomes the Executive Plan of Action for the Early Warnings for All initiative and sees this opportunity to continue raising awareness of the initiative while we are gathering politically and technical support to move our collective ambition forward. In the last decade, some of the most extreme weather disasters have been the most, and often and many times predicted, has been the most deadly, costly, and devastating disasters. It is well documented that early warnings only is positive and is turned into early action is able to save life. We in the IFRC strongly believe in building preparedness capacities that are risk-informed and impact-based at local level. And those local actors are ready to, for the local actor, for the first respondent, to be able to act on early warnings and to save life. Local actors that are anticipatory ready are going to be leading to safer communities. In the IFRC, as the lead agency for the Pillar 4 preparedness for response, we are very much looking forward to contribute to this initiative, and we are ready to drive the work in this pillar to make sure that early warnings reaches the farthest communities, and that those communities and those early warnings are being able to translate into early action that saves life. National Red Cross societies, as auxiliary of the public authorities, are very well placed among local actors to carry out that work forward. Among other things, because they are already working with with the government, with national, local governments, with hydrometeorological agencies, with other stakeholders in reinforcing the national system for early warning and anticipatory action. In the IFRC, we are already working on developing early action protocols. There are more than 40 protocols in different hazard, multi-hazard protocols that are being implemented that are ready to be activated. We are also scaling up our effort for anticipatory action, reaching out 4.3 million people annually and dedicating 25% of our disaster relief emergency fund to the anticipatory pillar by 2025. Last but not least, we would like to encourage us all to continue or encourage the platform, the initiative, to use existing collaboration and cooperation mechanisms, such as the IFRC-hosted risk-informed early action partnership and anticipatory hub. And last, we would really encourage that we make sure that early warnings are people-centered and reaches the farthest communities. And this is a pledge for all of us participating in the community. Sorry, in the initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ariel, for those comments. Very useful to round up. Before we close, I would like to invite panel members to share any takeaway that you would like us to have when leaving this room, especially to ensure partnerships during the implementation of this initiative. Who would like to start in a few seconds?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mami?
I was told by Selwyn Hart, another citizen of this country, who is leading us from the Executive Office of the Secretary General, that the Secretary General believes that this is going to be a proof or not that multilateralism works. I think that's very, very telling. As the Prime Minister said, and as you referred, it's a small part of the large picture, but as we all know, in these big machines, if small things that cannot operate well, then the machine is not working. So we take it as such an important initiative, and the UN system is really committed to making it happen.
Thank you, Mami. Jean?
Thank you. I suppose I had just two quick observations. Firstly, what a strong sense of consensus there is across speakers about the ingredients that are required. People have talked about the need to work with and alongside regional and local institutions, people-centred approaches to make sure that the systems work end-to-end. I think that takes me into the second point, which is a real sense of responsibility. We have the opportunity. The early warning for all, the political momentum has created opportunity and attention, and we must not waste this moment. And I think not wasting this moment means being really clear about what each of us do in this complex ecosystem to bring the best possible value. And as Prime Minister Motley said, in that spirit of partnership and that focus on making a real difference to everybody's lives, including those left behind. So I feel a real sense of responsibility coming from this. And momentum. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gerard. Inger, please.
We started with an extraordinary poet who spoke to the destruction that we, humanity, are doing to this beautiful, wonderful, amazing little planet of ours. And he spoke with such poetic fluency and such depth that really carried us away. And I think it resonated with me because the ravages which we have visited upon this earth are what we are living now. We in UNEP, we speak about the triple planetary crisis, the crisis of climate change, the crisis of nature and biodiversity loss, and the crisis of pollution and waste. And the poetry that, I think his name was Sky, and I must find him because it was just extraordinary. The poetry that he gave us was so powerful because it spoke to that. And so this initiative is one of many that we need to take because we, our generation, we hold in the hollow of our hands the future of this planet. Now that is one unbelievable heavy responsibility, a responsibility that we don't deserve, but a responsibility that is our generation. So we, these conscious citizens of this present time, we heard from the young woman who encouraged us to invite the youth. We have to take action because if we don't, who will? And so that's what I take away from today, a powerful commitment from across societies. Climate change is here now, and the action is for us to take. Thank you.
Fantastic call for action, Inger.
Thank you.
I would like to invite Sajuni. Do you want to add anything, Sajuni?
Just a few words I wanted to say is I do believe wholeheartedly in the involvement of youths because I want to just implore everyone to understand if you really want a society to change, then you need to start from a very small age because they are the ones who are more likely to be swayed than persons who are already stuck in their ways. And by targeting the youth, I believe that would be a huge advantage to just changing the mindsets of future generations.
Well, thank you very much. We have come to an end of this panel. I really want to thank all the participants in persons here, Prime Ministers, of course, from Barbados and St. Lucia, Excellencies, Ambassadors, development partners, CIDIMA, Head of CIDIMA, CARICOM, of course, all our UN colleagues, UN principals, and all our online audience who was with us today from the diverse part of the Caribbean, but also from diverse part of the world. So thank you for this. And I want to make a special thank to you, Mami. You've been a fantastic driving force behind this initiative to get it off the ground globally, but particularly prioritizing SEEDS and the Caribbean. So this is an extremely great signal, and I want to thank you on behalf of all of us here. Thank you for this. So we look forward to continuing in these partnerships. This is just the beginning of a 5-year journey that I'm sure will be extremely successful. Thank you, and we invite you for a reception outside this room.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nope, you're